Hello and welcome to my Wellbeing Wednesday. This is a very different thing for me, as normally I'm talking about fluffy things like makeup. But I'm privileged in that a few weeks ago I was contacted by a lady, well, not contacted by her, by the marketing team of Strong Nutrients. And she actually has been life-changing for me. So I think she's going to appear any second now. Hi, Zana. So I was doing, because I want to save it and sound efficient, so I was doing a quick intro there. I don't know if you heard, but I very much feel that you have been life-changing to me. So just saying that what started off as a simple thing, would you like to try some nutrients and supplements rather, has led to this month of discovery from me. And I think, you talk a lot and I talk a lot, and I told you about how I'd had a knee operation and had certain problems. So you offered to rehab me, which has been spectacular. But today I wanted to talk about the journey that I've done and that other people could do to get themselves a bit trimmer perhaps, but also supplements. And I've seen in the news just this week, in fact I wasn't really watching, but on the One Show last night they were talking about multivitamins and saying that taking them could actually shorten your life by a couple of years. But it was very much the multivitamin as opposed to things especially for you. So I want to talk about supplements as well, but you've changed me in many ways, because I never thought I'd be able to exercise over Zoom. I failed miserably during lockdown, and yet we've established an amazing training program together, and I couldn't believe how you could spot the tiniest things that I was doing wrong with my body, and would be very strict with me, I have to say. But I've learned a lot, and it certainly has, well, I feel you've changed my life. And actually watching through some of the saved lives on Strong Nutrients, I've seen that a lot of influencers that you've worked with, and I really don't consider myself to be an influencer, but a lot of the influencers that you work with all say that. And this was something that very, very quickly happened to me. I felt remarkably different, despite the fact that I'd lost a few pounds as well. So what is your philosophy that makes this so successful?
I suppose I'm looking at it when and this is the interesting thing with you, because when we were chatting initially, it was just about supplements, maybe nutrition, but I'm always looking at it from the whole angle. And with you, I could just spot the little gaps. If you just fill them in, it was going to change so much. For me, it's about getting the whole body as much as we can balanced back up. So most clients come to me for fat loss, and I'm not going to say I'm ignoring that. I'm not ignoring that, but I'm much more interested in what's happening, everything else, because that's an indication of what the body's doing. If you can get the body balanced up, it does the rest. And that means energy levels, it means sleep. And when it comes to the training side of it, often there's that phrase, the devil's in the detail. I don't like the phrase, because I think actually it's the opposite. All the goodness is in the detail. It's all those little gaps that you could be doing something beautifully well, but be missing two or three tiny little things. And those two or three tiny little things, whether in the training or the nutrition or the supplements, are the exact thing you need. And they're the things that make the vital difference. So it can be quite life-changing when you find them. And I think that's the bit that always makes me quite excited as well. It's looking for that little gap.
So I wasn't particularly thinking about losing weight when I first met you, although I did want to lose sort of half a stone. And I remember you saying, what's your goal? And I said to lose half a stone, and I've lost a couple more pounds, and now I want to lose a couple more still. But when it comes to diet, surely, I mean, just what you've been saying now, that implies that looking at yourself holistically is going to be make your diet a lot more
Yes,
successful.
and it's very much, and
Is that?
exactly as you said there, it's looking at your goals. So what is the outcome you're looking for? And I think the trouble with nutrition is that it's got so confusing. The more information we get, the harder it gets to figure out what to do. We've made it very confusing. With most of us, there's two things very briefly. The first is that it often gets looked at as to what should we do rather than what is the goal and the outcome we're looking for. So from the nutritional side, it's very much looking for what the goal and the outcome is, and again, where the gaps are. When I'm looking at nutrition, particularly, it seems to be the case with women once we get past or into the perimenopausal phase, it tends to happen a lot. You can tell the body's just not able to utilize fat as a fuel. And it impacts so many other things. So even though we mentioned the fat loss and we're looking at it at that point, at the fat loss point of view, we're also looking at it from, right, if your body can flip into that, what does it add on with the strength? How does it add on with the sleep patterns? I mean, and I'm not saying those are bad to begin with, but that's what I'm kind of looking at. How does it affect everything else? If we can just train the body back into how it was designed to work, I suppose, is how I would see it.
So you put me on this high protein, high fat diet, and so many people have asked me questions about this when I've been talking about it, from how on earth do you do it? Is it bad for you health-wise? Is it going to give you kidney stones? Is ketosis going to, throw you into hospital because it's going to make you ill? I felt great on it. There was one day after about 3 days when I felt very tired. And then I told you that I had this sort of ka-chung moment in my head and I suddenly felt very alert. And I didn't think I was suffering from brain fog, but I feel ever since that point that I've been a lot clearer in my head, even if I'm gabbling away now. So why does that happen?
Well, the reason that I really love the high fat diet, and then why all that happens sort of ties into it. I would argue that we evolved burning fat primarily as a fuel source, but we also evolved with the capacity to switch from fat burning into sugar burning and back to fat burning very readily. So metabolic flexibility is the term it tends to get called. And it does look like with the way we live now, our bodies are getting so dependent on sugar that it just can't seem to switch back into the fat burning when we need it. Now, sugar is like, and I saw this described and I loved the description. Sugar's like kindling when it comes to fuel. It's very quickly burned. Fires up, gone, and you have to keep fueling it. It's not efficient. It's really a fast burn. Fat is a very slow, steady, stable burn, if you like. So one of the main reasons that we did the high fat and that I was encouraging you to do it was to be able to train your body back into being able to burn fat as a fuel. And then you have this whole extra fuel source, and mental as well. I think it's far better. I mean, a lot of research shows this. It is far better for the brain. Although sugars aren't very helpful for brain functioning, they're too fast burning fuels. They're quite inflammatory. And we just wanted to train your body back into being able to burn the fat. That drop in energy on the 3rd day was just the point where your body was giving up. It accepted the fact there's no sugar there. It stopped looking for it, but it hadn't quite flipped into the fat burning yet. So you just had this little gap. And then when it flips, your energy is exactly as you say. It's better. There's 9 calories. I'm always saying this. There's 9 calories per gram of fat. And we've been brought up to believe that's a bad thing. And nothing could be further than from the truth. 9 calories is over double the energy that a gram of sugar has. So it means technically on a high fat plan, you could have double the energy, because your body's using those calories as what it's supposed to be, energy to get you through your day, mental and physical.
So what about the portion?
Yes.
Because it was very important that I had a certain amount of protein to a certain amount of fat, which again I've found quite difficult to explain to people.
This is important. Now, this is a high fat plan, and actually it's not a high protein one. And I can completely understand why you might think it is, genuinely. And I really mean it, but actually it's more of a medium protein, but it is high fat. Now, this is not it's not like all those just getting fat into the diet. It's not a very generic keto. This is a very specific one. And the reason being, the purpose of this plan is very much to help flatline insulin. and just for those of you, I'm sure you've all heard this, but I'll just very quickly run through. Obviously, sugars, when you eat them, go into the bloodstream, the body releases insulin to get the sugars out. But what often people don't realize is protein can do a touch of the same. So your protein, your fish or meat breaks down into amino acids and sugars, and those sugars can cause a little bit of a spike. But fat is the only food group that doesn't cause any raise of that insulin at all. So that's one of the reasons we're on a high fat one. So it's perfect for if people are trying to get a low insulin. This is like an ultra low GI plan. It really, the goal is only almost to flatline the insulin. The ratios become very important.
Can I just say just 1 second, if anyone's got any questions, please, type away and we will try and answer them, or otherwise send me a direct message or comment, and we will answer the questions 100%. Afterwards.
Yes.
Sorry.
So this ratio game, we have deliberately got less protein in the morning, because if you spike your insulin in the morning, it tends to be up for the day. It's very hard for the body to get it back down again, and you'll be hungry afterwards. Ghrelin gets released, you end up craving, you'll end up being hungry much quicker. So we keep the protein quite low in the morning, remember, but the fat is still quite high. And the fat we're talking about are things like avocados, it's nuts, it can be cream cheese, it can be butter, it could be as simple as olive oil, but what we're doing on this plan tends to be nuts like walnuts or pine nuts or macadamias, avocados, or it can be cream cheese. But the protein in the first meal is low, and then as the day goes on, it can increase. And that's because the body seems to deal with that little sugar hit better in the evening. And the sugar hit, by that I mean it's your protein that breaks down into those amino acids and sugars. But the ratios is super important.
And I'm sure a lot of people don't have high protein dinners. That's when you come in from work or something and you just have a quick stir fry with no meat in it, or very little, or a few prawns or something and some rice, rather than your piece of fish and lots of vegetables or a salad. That's how I used to eat.
Protein switch over. So on this plan in particular, it's very much about both stabilizing insulin and switching the body into being able to burn fat as a fuel. And the really interesting thing about this plan is, okay, there's 2 or 3 things that occur. But with this in particular, it's not about, it's about eating when you're hungry, but not eating when you're not. So a lot of people find 2 meals a day enough, but some people will need 4. For me, this plan is all around energy. It's all around energy. If your energy is high, you'll be burning fat. If your energy is dropped, it means your body has lost its fuel, which is the fat. And then it's going to go and search for sugars. So the reason for the fat with all this, on this plan with each meal, is to give the body enough fuel to stay in fat burning. It's very like if you poured oil onto, if ever you've had a frying pan going up in flames and you poured more oil on it, it flares up even more. On this, the more fat you eat, the more, within reason, the more fat you burn, the higher your energy is, and the more you're going to lose fat. A very underweight person on this plan will want to eat 4 or 5 times a day because they'll have no backup fuel. And somebody who's overweight, usually if you feel you've got about a stone to lose, 2 meals a day becomes enough. But you need the fat in there to keep burning the fat and to keep the insulin flatlined. And if you reduce it, it doesn't work as well.
So one question I had when I put up my picture from the first week and on the 3rd week or something, one person said I couldn't do that diet although I want to lose weight because I've already got high cholesterol.
Right.
How does that
this is the good news. Well, good or bad news, depending on your point of view. You can do it. However, you need to be super strict. So this is the first line. When I was writing that book, before the book, the high fat diet, and there was about 11, I think, publishers around a table, and myself and Helen went in to talk to them. And I looked at them in horror, asking why they wanted to write this, because I said, you do know, if people do this wrong, this is the fastest way I know to get fat and increase cholesterol, just to say, if you do it right, your cholesterol goes down. And what I mean by right or wrong is, now when I say your cholesterol goes down, the ratio shifts. So you get that bigger gap between the HDL and the LDL.
Yeah.
So it actually helps it. But if you think about it, your body's going into serious fat burning. I have a lot of clients that will lose 7 to 8 pounds in those 10 days. And I've had more that I have had some that have lost close to a stone in under 3 weeks. So you're losing, and that's fat. It's fat coming down very quickly, but energy is staying up. You're not losing the same amount of muscle as you might in a low kind of calorie diet. So it's very, if you think of where that fat's all coming off, so everything is more than likely balancing up, but the cholesterol does readjust. And that's what the research shows on it. So you get the bigger gap. The doing it right bit, I will emphasize, and that really means 2 things. First is the really obvious, you don't cheat. As we were saying there, breads, rice, pastas, the obvious things are out. You know, it's a low carbohydrate diet, but it is quite strict on the actual ratios. And when we say low carbohydrate, we really are looking at just green vegetables in there as the carbohydrates, if you like.
Which actually I didn't find a problem at all. I quite enjoyed having well, not different, but having several sort of small portions together of green vegetables at night. And the only thing was, I'm not vegetarian, but I don't normally eat very much meat, and I was eating more meat and fish actually, but more meat than I normally eat. But that was the only difference, I guess.
Well, you are, yeah.
And not having the homemade bread my husband makes. But.
And I think the thing to emphasize as well on this, of course, is that this isn't for all the time. This isn't necessarily long term. My purpose, my reason for putting people on, for putting clients on this, is to train their body back into being able to metabolize fat. And the bonus is you lose a lot of weight while you're doing it. And then after it, it's more, you go into more of what might be a mainstream way of eating. So if you like the vegetable proteins, you can bring them back in. It's keeping the carbs low in the long term, not out necessarily. Nothing is out in the long term. But in the short term, this is a very short term plan. I have had clients in the past doing it for quite some time. So you can stay on to the long term, but it's a bit difficult in a normal world. My reason for doing it is just getting you back into metabolizing fats so your body can do it more readily and switch in and out.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't I think I did it for about 9 days, and I certainly didn't find it a problem. And I can totally see that I could maybe go back and do it for a couple of days a week, or if I found that I started putting weight on again, that I'd very happily do it. It just became, an easy thing to do. But should we worry about our weight as we age?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. So the no bit of that is, oh gosh, in some cases, I'd love if people threw out scales. Because particularly if we're looking at this from a weight versus a fat loss, we can get very confused about the difference. And that is, it's so, oh gosh, this is huge. I honestly believe we need to be focusing on muscle gain as we age. And I say muscle gain, I mean muscle recovery as we age. And by muscle, I mean lean body mass. I mean protein in bones, protein through the entire body as an all of our tissue. We should be focusing in on that. Now, they estimate, I'm always quoting this, they estimate we lose half a pound of muscle a year from the age of 30, and that's lean body mass, not just muscle. So between the age of 30 to the age of 60, if that could be 15 pounds of actual lean tissue gone. Now, so I think, isn't it
and
massive?
That's horrific.
So I think the focus should be on gaining that back above anything else. So if you've very little fat to lose, or kind of weight to lose in the sense of fat, then I think your goal should be weight gain. Get the muscle back, not fat gain now. And your shape will be totally different. That said, if there's weight around the belly, and particularly, I don't mean a little bit, honestly, I really wouldn't be worrying about that. But if there is that, you could look at it and go, that really shouldn't be there. I think the old fashioned thing was if you can pinch more than an inch. But that bit around the belly, then we don't want that, because that's indicative of potentially other health issues. But weight on the hips, weight on the thighs, anywhere else actually isn't. So that's aesthetic. That's up to you, if you like.
Well, I definitely have my weight around my middle, and my daughter very kindly said to me, well, you have lost weight, Mum, but maybe it's just skin now. But but I know, I'm sure some people would say to me, well, you're slim, but I know I've still got more than an inch I can grab hold of. So for my own competitiveness, I'd like to firm that up as well. So I will continue
On
my
that,
journey
can I
now.
just add?
Yes, and
So I
so
was just
that
going to say on
sorry,
that, the
yeah, go on.
advantage of focusing on the muscle strength and gain, and when I say gain, I don't mean getting chunky and bulky. I don't mean that, but the focusing on the muscle's really active. So as you build muscle, your metabolism goes up too. So it becomes easier to lose the fat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Good.
sorry, just to jump in there, there's that dynamic as well. So that's the other advantage of focusing on building your lean tissue.
So I'd written though, but when you've lost the weight you wanted, perhaps when you've hit that goal of weight loss, what next? What do you do next? How do you, because that's the old classic of people joining
And
a
then
diet
what? And
club
then
and they
what?
lose their weight and then the
Yeah.
next year they go.
I've got
So
two rules of thumb. Now it will vary a little bit depending on people's goals, what they're trying to achieve, what their, and I know this sounds cliched when you say what their lifestyle is, but actually if you've a high stress lifestyle and are seriously active, it might be slightly different to be a very sedentary one, and so on and so forth. So it can depend a little on that. The overview, I have three, I suppose, rules that I think work super well as you track forward. I think the intermittent fasting works superbly well for helping stabilize insulin levels. Now, I wouldn't be doing it for fat loss, although it certainly works for some people to lose weight and fat with it. I love it for the stability and almost the recalibration that happens with hormones when you give it a gap, that gap. And I'm talking about that 14 to 16-hour gap between your last meal in the evening to your first meal the next day. So I love that.
and why is that 14 to 16 so important?
The last
Those
two
last
hours,
two
your body,
hours, why are they
that's,
the crucial thing? And you're
from
actually
my
dying.
understanding, that's when the magic really begins to hit in, where the body starts converting fat. You've got that brown fat and white fat, and the body switches into a state closer to what happens when you're on the high fat plan. You get this lovely stabilization of insulin, and the body starts beginning to switch into those fats and converting them into the fuel as such. And that really, I think, makes a big difference. It also helps energy. I mean, if nothing else, it's great for steady energy. And it seems to stabilize sort of cravings. And that's, again, because the insulin's getting steady. So one of my first loves is the intermittent fasting.
So yeah, so I've started that, and I never thought I would stick to it. But I think it'll be 3 weeks tomorrow, and actually I've quite enjoyed doing it. I think there was only one day when I felt a bit funny and ate a bit earlier, but it was still into the 14.
And
I just didn't get to
what can I
16.
just add on to that
So
little bit there, Linda?
sorry,
And I would
yeah,
say that if people are intermittent fasting, don't be afraid of the odd day you just can't. And it will depend a little bit on what you eat the night before. So
yeah.
if you've eaten if you've eaten a high carb meal, low protein meal, like you described just there a little bit earlier, you will be hungry very early the next day. If you get a slightly higher protein diet with a bit more fat and a bit less carbs, it'll sustain you through, and the intermittent fasting becomes so much easier.
And I've noticed that too. So let's move on to supplements, because that was the original reason that I got to meet you. And I like taking supplements, I'll be quite honest. And, like my dentist said I haven't got the best gums in the world, so I should take vitamin D, which I do. And I'm always covered in fact SPF 50. So again, it's a good reason. But how should we determine what supplements we should take?
It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? I try and keep it,
Well, it is.
I try and keep it
Yeah.
as simple as I can. Um, I'm sitting here actually thinking, should I tell people what I do? And actually I will. So I have this tendency to change course every few months to a different, depending on what I'm doing. So sometimes I'm really focusing on my training and my strength, and I focus on it that way. Other times I might focus on it purely from a real health drive, bringing down inflammation, and I might focus on it that way. So it really depends on goals and outcomes, but there are a few that I find, and I can really only say this from what I find when I'm talking with clients, that come up time and time again. And I have to say, in some cases, it's with myself too. I'm always looking at sleep patterns, energy levels, and capacity to lose fat, and and huge one, stress levels. And by stress, I would be considering things like, it could be the obvious, you just feel stressed. But for some people, it means they fly off the handle way too readily and they're watching themselves do it. For others, it's just a sense of anxiousness. And for some, it can be literally just feeling down with no particular reason. Now, obviously, there can be other reasons for that, but in some cases, it can just be a reaction, literally the adrenals. The common term is adrenal fatigue. Your adrenals are a bit overworked for too long. The job, just back to the sleep and the stress link and the fat link, because these come up a lot. The job of your adrenals is to produce those anti-stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. They also produce 40% of our steroid hormones. By that I mean your progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. And particularly for many perimenopause onwards, obviously those shift and fluctuate quite dramatically from when we're in our 20s and 30s. Cortisol, its job is to wake us up in the morning. Its job is also to break down our muscle stores to access sugars and to get the sugar into the bloodstream so the body has the energy for what we call the fight or flight reaction, for fighting or running. In English, cortisol can cause you to gain weight, particularly around the tummy. And it can, if it gets released at night, it can keep you nicely awake or wake you up in the middle of the night. And for me, okay, I am as interested, if not more interested, into how people are feeling stress-wise, or if they've had some major traumatic event happened in the last 18 months, because I think that can have right a knock-on effect right now that will impact everything else. So back to your question of supplements. I ask myself those three questions. I ask all my clients those three questions. What are your energy levels like in a scale of 1 to 10? What's your sleep like in a scale of 1 to 10? How do you feel your stresses?
And you did ask me
yeah.
that, I remember.
And depending on the answer to those three is what I determine happens next. So best supplements for sleep. And I believe as we go through perimenopause, menopause and beyond, our need for magnesium seems to go up. So magnesium is one of the top ones I recommend. It helps us absorb our calcium, which is essential for our bone density. It helps regulate melatonin, which is the hormone that helps us sleep. It helps bring down cortisol levels, which obviously then has a knock-on effect with so much else. It's involved with this thing we call ATP production, which is our energy molecules. So it helps with the health of the mitochondria, the ATP. It's involved in over 600 processes in the body, to be precise, but it seems to be hugely beneficial once those hormonal levels begin to shift and change. It also helps the body get rid of used up estrogen and kind of deal with that. So magnesium.
Well, I have to say, so I started taking magnesium. Sorry, I will
no, don't. I'll keep talking.
And I've never taken a supplement before where I've actually felt a reaction almost immediately. I took it and I was like, I really slept well last night, and I've just reordered some actually because I'd run out because my husband started taking it as well. But we both said we were sleeping
and
better.
That will be it'll be a
so that on
it's brilliant for that. Particularly fun enough as we age, for any age group, but particularly as we age. And the second one that I find myself encouraging clients to take a lot is what we call in strong nutrients a chill pill, which is vitamin B5. And that's another one that's hugely supportive for the adrenal glands. And we used to call it the happy vitamin when I studied nutrition first because of its impact on mood. You relax better, you sleep better, energy levels tend to go up generally, and mood goes up. But all of these things are things that when your adrenals are working properly, would be naturally doing exactly, you would feel happier, you would sleep better, and your energy levels are better. So the chill pill combined with the magnesium, I find those two make a big difference. And exactly as you say, so how do we know if we need them? If you take them and you feel a difference, you needed it because these are nutrients. These aren't herbs. They're not coming from a single plant. They're nutrients you should find in food. Absolutely. But often it can be very hard to get the quantity you need to keep up with your lifestyle. or decades of, dare I say,
Okay.
abuse on your body. And people don't always like that concept, but we really do abuse our bodies compared to how we're supposed to live. You know, from alcohol to sugar to the way we live, we burn the candle on both ends, the stress levels. We put our bodies under a lot of pressure they weren't designed to deal with on that ongoing basis. So if you feel a difference, I think you need it.
So then you also, so then you also have your protein powder, casein protein. Now, previously I'd always had
Yes.
pea protein. And then, first of all, you know, why do we even take it? Well, most people I know actually have protein, not because they're bodybuilders or anything, but because they make smoothies and it thickens the smoothie up and it usually tastes quite pleasant. So what do you think it's for? Why casein rather than whey or pea? And I was trying to explain to somebody yesterday in my gym what casein was, and I got myself in a right muddle.
What
so
is casein?
what is it?
Casein
as well?
is my absolute favorite because in my experience, it seems to, I mean, and it's been shown to, it's one of the most highly absorbed forms of protein, which means your body can soak all of it up and people notice a difference. Honestly, usually within a week to 10 days of taking it. And by difference, I mean in just feeling firmer. And that even if you're not training. I'm going to just tie two things together as quickly as I can. When you said we're not bodybuilders, we're not. But if you consider between the age of 30 to the age of 60, you could have lost 15 pounds of muscle. Maybe you want to think a bit more like them. We're not going to ever be a bodybuilder, but we might just get some of that back. And I'm not saying you have to be to that degree. I'm really not. But it's so much changing the mindset of what it means to build muscle. We're talking about recovering it here. We're not talking about even building any extra. It's recovering it. Now, you don't need protein powders. Definitely don't. Genuinely, you don't need protein powders, just in case anyone thinks I'm saying you do. You can get all of this naturally through food. Casein protein is a protein you get in cottage cheese, yogurts, your dairy protein. And in the good old days, you had the curds and the whey. The curds went with your cheese and your yogurts, and the whey went off to be fed to the livestock. And now the whey gets put into big tubs and fed to bodybuilders. And the casein you don't find as often because it's being used up for all that, you know, nutritious dairy, cheese and yogurt. And the benefit of taking it is it's an easy way to top up your protein without wading your way through more fish and meats and cheese and eggs and the likes. So it's not replacing it necessarily. It's just an easy way to kind of top it up. It's hugely highly absorbed.
Yeah.
And it's also very low glycemic, which means insulin doesn't spike in the same way some of the other proteins do. It is more highly absorbed than the vegetarian and vegan proteins, just saying. But if you're vegetarian, you can do casein, but if you're vegan, you won't be able to. And the pea protein is perfectly acceptable. It's a good source of protein. But the casein has a higher absorption rate. It's lower glycemic, which means you don't get the insulin spike, which means you stay fuller for much longer without the craving, which is also great. And it's very alkaline. It's sort of mops of acid. Your skin gets a bit softer on it.
I also just love the way, I mean, I put it into my smoothie maker with a bit of almond milk, but not too much, and then it comes out like a mousse. And I put in a spoon. I've got the vanilla one, so I put in a spoon of cacao, and it makes like a dessert, but it's not sweet, which is really nice. Because hopefully I have lost my desire for sweetness.
Where it's really helpful.
Yeah, and I started off doing it if I was not thinking I wasn't having enough protein in the evening as a sort of dessert. Yesterday I put it in the freezer to see, and that was rather nice. I had it like chocolate ice cream with a few raspberries.
Very nice.
Yes.
There was one question I think got
more or less.
It's gone up the scroll, the feed, but I think there was one there of the magnesium question. How much magnesium should you take a day?
Oh yes.
Right, depending on which form. So in strong nutrients we have a citrate form, and I would normally recommend between 200 up to 400 mg of that a day. Now it depends a little on a couple of things. It depends a little bit on how much calcium-rich foods you eat. So if you have a lot of cheese or dairy, you could end up with 400 to 600 milligrams to counteract and absorb that calcium and make use of it. But if you don't take any cheese, Yeah. Oh, have I lost you? Are we here? I'm still here, aren't I? Yes,
Yeah,
I have a
I'm
note
still
saying I
here. I
mightn't be.
just lost.
But I'm here. So I think anything from 200 to 400 mg a day works very well. Yeah, depending on how much calcium you're bringing into the diet.
So I hope everyone's enjoyed what we've been talking about, and we're going to come back again next Wednesday. I think that this journey has massively improved my strength, but also my well-being, and as well as losing the pounds. But it's been quite an emotional journey for me, and Sana and I were just talking this morning before we came live that this whole experience of trying to get fitter is quite emotional, and you have to be focused. You need to have goals, and you also need to, I've found, not listen to other people. That's quite difficult. And I was talking to my sister-in-law at the weekend who's trying to lose weight, and she said, you know, she goes out for coffee a couple of times a week and people destroy what she's trying to do because they offer her cake and she doesn't like to say no. I'm in the frame of mind now where I tell them to, you know, go away, because I'm well, it's my natural competitiveness, which she admitted I have, and she perhaps doesn't have. But it is difficult, and it's very easy to kind of now go out with a group of girlfriends and the cocktails come out and you find you've undermined everything you've tried to do. And I know you say it doesn't matter if it's, you know, just once, but I think it's finding that special place where you decide, I've made changes to my life and I want to keep this. And I do really think that and I'm talking about people younger than me, but perimenopause, menopause, and every year after that, as you get older, you want to be healthy. You want to live every year in a happy place and a good place. And I think it's important to have to go on that journey physically and emotionally. So that's probably a very long-winded way of saying what I'd like to cover with you next
how
week.
to make it, how to stick with it more effortlessly. Yes.
Yes, and also what to do. And let me just have a look at my own notes. Oh, and so my last thing was, any tips to get someone started and to focus on it? In other words, how can we be successful?
Oh yes. Honestly, there's a few ways of going about it, and we've heard this so often, but if you just make one good change, it can make all the difference in the world. I think also the thing to remember is the problem with carbohydrates and sugars is that they are addictive. You end up with an insulin release that causes a ghrelin release that causes you to crave. And now you're making willpower super hard. As in other words, you really have to work hard. The lovely thing, and I'm not saying necessarily the first step is to go on a high fat diet. It can be, but I'm not saying it is. But the lovely thing about a high fat is it becomes very effortless because you don't have the ghrelin release. So suddenly you can decide, you don't have something inside screaming for something that you're fighting. So I would always think the first step is do what you can to get those carbohydrates and sugars down and replace them. Don't go low calorie. Now, we're not talking about taking food overall out. Replace it with protein and fats. And that could be anything from fish and meat and eggs to nuts and avocado to extra olive oil. Just get that balance, gradually reduce one. And even starting with that cravings and that sort of voice that has you going for that kind of thing, the likes of the cake. Now, I get there's two things going on here. One is a bit of a peer pressure because of your friends are having it too. But the other is the sugar can do the talking. And if you can at least get that point where the sugar doesn't do the talking, that helps. And one of the quick tips I give to clients is if you eat a little bit of protein first, before you go to do anything. So if you know you're going to be in that environment, you're going to feel a bit fuller. And one of two things will happen is you'll look at the cake and you won't want it. You genuinely won't. Or if you do have it, you'll feel a bit full, so you won't feel like eating all of it. And finally, if you do eat all of it, you'll do less damage because the protein will slow down that sugar hit into the bloodstream. So you can't really...
Yeah,
you can't
That's a good
So
tip,
have some
actually.
protein before you go out, and that could be in the form of a protein shake. It could be in the form of just some cottage cheese. It could be in a protein pot from Pret, but something that's just protein based. I mean, you can add anything you like to it, but protein based primarily, and that usually does the trick.
Well, thank you very much. Our half an hour has gone over, as I suspected it might. Just to say to everyone, if you, and I advise you to do this, do go to Strong Nutrients, and I will write this in the copy, and have a look at the post, because there's lots of other lives with, as I say, proper influencers who will have looked at their experience from a slightly different angle. And also, if you go to Zana Morris on her account, then she's got lots of exercise tips as well. And thank you very much. I've loved every moment.
Thank you.
I've spent with you.
Likewise. Thank you.
And
You will
I will
indeed.
see you
Take
next
care.
Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
And thank you everyone
Bye-bye.
that's joined us. Bye.